Lovely.
Alex, we give it a minute and we start?
Yes, absolutely. I am admitting participants who are coming, and I'm really happy to see so many joining us. Absolutely. We'll give it a minute so that everyone can be in. And in the meantime, I really want to renew my thanks to all the speakers joining us. It's really exciting. And I'm looking forward to hearing about experiences that you're going to bring today. So thank you.
Yes, it's lovely to see a full house. It's really encouraging.
Sanskriti, would you like me to put the banner of the webinar as the background?
Yes, I think do that. So we can then start in just a minute while we just have a few more people in the waiting room who are trickling in. Please. Alex, I think we start now.
Absolutely, yes.
Wonderful. And greetings and a very warm welcome to today's webinar from the Blue Flag team at CBE at FEE. I'm Sanskriti Menon, joining you from Pune, India. And I'm a member of the FEE Board of Directors and the board responsible for Blue Flag. I'm joined with Alessandro Venti, the International Blue Flag Coordinator, and Manon and Daria, who are interns with FEE. We also bring you greetings from Johan, who is the International Director for Blue Flag. Our topic today is water governance across sectors with Blue Flag. And today's event is part of the webinar series, Acting Against Pollution and the Little Less Plus campaign. Today's topic is well aligned with the theme of the World Water Day 2023, which is about accelerating change to solve the water and sanitation crisis. As you know, FEE's global strategic focus in this year 2023 is reducing environmental pollution. And of course, water pollution is a major area of concern, especially for Blue Flag. And the reason we have this focus is that freshwater and coastal ecosystems provide essential services and value to society, well, including for livelihoods, recreation, as habitat for many species, and with productive and regulating functions. However, pollution in its very many forms threatens the health and livelihoods and resilience of people and other species who rely on wetlands. The purpose of the webinar today is to highlight the importance of each stakeholder in the common effort to protect aquatic ecosystems from the threats of pollution. Collaboration is key across sectors, and we include in that the government, businesses, and other stakeholders, and of course the public, that is citizens and consumers. And you are key actors who can make and do make such collaborations possible. So thank you for being here. Our event today has experts who will share a range of different experiences and interventions that have been done in inclusive, active, and engaging ways. And I warmly welcome our speakers. And I would now like to hand over to Alex to introduce our eminent guests. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Sanskriti, for the very inspiring opening words. And again, so I'm Alessandro from Blue Flag International. And I bring also the greetings of the Blue Flag International Director, Mr. Joan Dua. But I would like to take this opportunity to really thank naturally the participants who are here with us today. I think now we're going to hit 100 participants. So I'm really excited to see so many of you here. And I really sincerely hope, but I'm also convinced that it's going to be an inspiring session because we have incredible speakers from a variety of organizations, such as the UNEP, the European Environment Agency, the Blue River Foundation, Ethic, and eConcrete. We have a really tight schedule. So I'm going to ask the speakers to keep it to 15 minutes each, so we can also try and have a question and answer session at the end. And a few house rules before we start. I would kindly ask all of you to mute yourselves during the interventions of the speakers. I would also suggest, since we're so many, to not use the webcam so that the connection goes a bit lighter. And I would suggest to post, if you have any questions, post them in the chat. And we try to have them answered at the end of the webinar. If we cannot manage to, we're going to get back to you and we're going to try to get back to you after the webinar. The webinar is recorded, and yeah, I don't want to take any more time from the speakers. I will introduce the first one, who is Alex Pires from UNEP. He is the Program Management Officer in the Source to Sea Pollution Unit. Alex is a civil engineer and sustainability specialist, and he has more than 20 years experience. He has worked with capacity building and outreach initiatives. He has experience with the cooperation of public and private sector. And we're really looking forward to hearing the presentation by Alex. So Alex, I leave the floor to you. And if you want, you can share the slides. Otherwise, I can do it for you. Let me know.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, I would like to share the slides, but the host has to give me the
Absolutely, I'll give it to you
here.
Now. Yes.
Okay.
Let me find you. Alex.
Meanwhile, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants. And thank you, Alessandro, and the whole Blue Flag International team for the invitation in participating in this webinar. Jumbo from Africa, I'm here in Kenya. And let me see if I got the, yes, now I do.
Lovely.
So it's gonna be here. And let me know, do you have there in the screen?
I see your notes instead of the presentation. So
okay,
maybe
so
try with the swap displays. Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, now I see it
Good.
Perfectly. Thank you, Alex.
You are welcome, and thank you. So without further ado, let's just have that in consideration. We have many challenges related of how to bring governance to our seas, to our water bodies, to our beaches. And the challenges are for many natures. They could be technological barriers or lack of capacity. They could be the lack of the understanding the value of the ecosystem service and the value of the health nature for us human beings. They could be challenges related with governance. That's the main topic here today, and also with how we use the limited resources that we have. But in the end, sustainable wastewater management, and that's what my team here, myself, Ricardo, and other colleagues at UNEP work, we know that we are part of that solution, and the governance around sustainable wastewater management should become a priority to all decision makers and that work with that. So we are looking forward to solutions and systems that could be nature-based solutions, but also conventional solutions as well. UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Programme, had been hosting the global program of action for protection of marine environment from land-based activities for a few decades already. And that program has graduated in some conventions like the Basel Conventions, because it had been working with persistent organic pollutants, heavy metals. And since 2012, we have the Manila Declaration, where 3 areas were asked, where countries, more than 140 countries, that's part of that program, asked the program, the GPA, to work and support countries to tackle the problems of litter, nutrients, and wastewater. And of course, we work very close together with the regional Cs. There are more than 18 regional Cs with the participation of more than 146 countries. Next year, the regional Cs program is going to celebrate its half a century of existence, and that's for sure a very important outcome in relation with our work. Sorry. And UNEP's mission is clear to provide leadership and encourage partnership in caring for the environment. And we do that by inspiring, informing, and enabling nations and people to improve the quality of life without compromising the future generations. And the countries that are our constituents, countries requested the executive director of the UNEP, of course, within the availability of resources, to assist the developing countries upon their request by strengthening the capacities of those countries to reach the targets of having by 2030 the amount of untreated wastewater that reach water bodies. And if we look on SDG target 6.3, we see that's exactly asking UNEP to help developing countries to have the capacities to reach that important target. That target says that by 2030, improved water quality by reducing, eliminating, dumping, and minimize release of hazardous chemicals and materials in the water. And again, having the proportion of untreated wastewater and substantially increasing recycling and safe water reuse globally. Yeah? And we know that when we look to the SDG 6, we are looking at an integrated approach through the whole water cycle, but we should and have to go beyond it, because we also have, and that must be very daring for several of you, SDG 14 to conserve and sustainable use oceans, seas, and marine resources. And of course, that deals with salt marsh as natural filters, the recreational value of water. What I think that is one of the things that Blue Flag stands out with, but also fish nursery habitats, pollution control in that ecosystem, and everything that comes from the land through the water and up in our oceans, lakes, seas, and the coastal areas, to understand the very important economic and social and even spiritual benefits of freshwater and marine ecosystems, to have the blue carbon sinks as part of the process of addressing climate change, understand the values of the coral reefs, shoreline protections, and of course, sustainable fisheries for food security. And we look here in the source to see UNEP, at UNEP, we look very dearly to target 14.1. It's going to be in 2 years' time, but it's also broad because it says that prevent and significantly reduce marine pollution of all kinds, in particular for land-based activities, including marine debris and nutrient pollutions. So that's one of the targets that we've been helping countries. And this is a very simple diagram. I believe that everybody understood it. I'm just joking. It's to show how complex, but also how relevant is the interconnection between the SDG 6 and other SDGs. The sustainable management of water supports so many socio-economic and environmental objectives related to the SDGs that water should be seen as the element that connects those SDGs. So to achieve several of those SDGs that are listed here, the water SDGs and of course also the SDG 14 will be key for our societies, for our countries, for humanity to even not reach, get as close as possible of the SDGs. And we also have to address several issues that are not necessarily written there yet on the SDGs. Those are emerging issues, and I'm just going to bring one example here that I believe that most of you are aware of, but it's always important to remember. It's the challenge of microplastics. It's there, it's in everything that we eat, it's in everything that we drink, and we actually do not know yet how much it's there and what are the best ways to avoid it, the ways to mitigate the problem, and the consequences of it. But we know that it's been there going together with microplastics, but through degradation process, even microplastics convert into convert to microplastics, and it comes from landfills, from our urban activities, from drainage, from industries, agriculture, everywhere. Even our dear football fields also can contribute to it, especially if it's synthetical. I'm from Brazil, that's the thing that I love football. But now, going for the governance aspect of all of that, the living source to see policies that will make governance possible cannot be achieved, cannot be done in isolation. It must be implemented across what we call policy areas. We have many policies for forests, for agriculture management, for waste management, for biodiversity protection, for fishery management, just to mention a few. We can also include energy, we can also include urban development, all of those, there is governance structures policies. But to address the problem that we have in front of us, it's necessary to have an integrated governance that will deliver impact the pathways, measuring, coordinating, bringing the necessary synergies and holistic approach to the policies that are there. And many questions should be taken in consideration when bringing that way of thinking. And just some of them, how to address competition between policy areas and economic drivers that seemingly conflicting with the environmental priorities. And most of the time, we are not conflicting. We're just not looking in the right time scale to see that actually they are very deeply interconnected and mutual beneficial. Another thing that should be considered, how those new policies that will be integrating the current one will interact or influencing existing policies and the regulatory regimes already in place or being implemented in the near future. What are the major barriers to change? And especially, what's the best enabling mechanisms to address those barriers? How to measure progress in that holistic and cross-cutting policy perspective, and ensuring that that progress implementation goes from implementation to policy making again, or to policy development again. So this is just some questions. And here at UNEP, we adopt the source to sea approach to sustainable wastewater management, but also with a very cross-cutting perspective. That cross-cutting perspective includes on wastewater, our view and work together with colleagues that works on nutrients, on marine litter. We bring the One Health approach as a core element for our work, and we are looking a lot with food security, because almost 50% of the world population in 2050 will be living on some level of severe water scarcity. So have wastewater reused for food security, it's a key thing of our time. We bring the perspective of climate mitigation and climate adaptation together. Also bringing the common approach to biodiversity of several UN agencies, and the current discussion of a common approach to pollution action among the UN agencies, because governance should also be achieved at that level, at that very global level with the multilateral institutions. We are proud to host here in UNEP the Global Wastewater Initiative. It's a multi-stakeholder platform born 10 years ago. This year, we are celebrating the 10th year, the first decade of that very important initiative. More than 100 participants from all regions in the world participates in that effort. It looks forward to address the challenge of wastewater management and sanitation provision, works to change the paradigm around wastewater from a waste to a valuable resource for our societies and ecosystems. And we have two other partners initiatives. One is the Global Partnership on Marine Litter, and the other one is the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management. The coordinator seated next to me here, and we are all part of the same source to see unit here at UNEP. Just a snapshot of the recent portfolio. I'm not going to go into details because I just have 2 minutes more, but we are working a lot with policy, with technology, with awareness rising, demonstration projects that is leading to scaling up and private sector engagement. And I was asked to bring an example, and I brought the example of a pilot project in Malaysia. That project received a couple of years ago the award of being one of the SDG Good Practice awarded by UN DESA. And it's a beautiful project because it's working at a very local level in the Sabah Marine National Park, very important national park in Malaysia. A first phase proved the feasibility of that curious independent sewage treatment plant that's very low cost, use innovative technology adapted for settlements that lives above the water. And you can imagine there are few of our mankind that lives above water, especially in developing countries, including mine. And the second phase, we work with capacity building, empowering local communities, especially women, to maintain and upgrade that system. And we are now moving for next phase to scale up the successful pilot in Malaysia and other countries with similar characteristics. My time is ending, so I want to flag that we will be publishing a very important report called From Seawater to Rich Water. It's going to be published in August of this year. And it's going to be there in World Water Week. I'm not going to go into the details here, but it's a very important, it's a flagship publication that deals with wastewater. But I want to end up with this slide, and Alex, this is the last slide. We came from Rio 20, and we have the SDGs created there in 2015. We had last year the UN Ocean Conference, and it's happening today, the UN Water Conference. It's the first conference in almost half a century dealing with water. The last one was in 1977. And I leave you with that vision that working from those four scales, globally, regionally, national, subnational, local level, community level, by strengthening partnerships, growing the understand, building commitments, and taking actions on the ground, we can reach a world in which land, freshwater, coastal, and marine resources are managed in a holistically way, balancing the benefits of environment, communities, and economic resource to sea. So with that, I thank you very much, and sorry for passing 30 seconds of my time. Back to you, Alex.
Alex, thank you so much for the very inspiring presentation. Absolutely. And you really kept it at a great time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the inspiring words. And I think your presentation really gives an idea of the complexity of the governance system, because there are so many levels, so many different stakeholders involved with different needs. And but with this complexity, it also comes great opportunities to really build something meaningful together. I think the example that you brought from Malaysia was really inspiring, and it gives us an impression of what really man can do to really preserve the aquatic environment. So thank you so much, Alex, for these inspiring words. And now I'm going to introduce the second speaker for today. Mustafa Aydin, he comes from the European Environment Agency, he's a zero pollution expert. Mustafa also represents the EEA and sits in the Blue Flag International jury, same as UNEP. And Mustafa is going to talk to us about the EU Zero Pollution Action Plan and monitoring assessment, web reports like from source to seas. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Mustafa. Yours is the floor, and thank you for being here with us today, Mustafa.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. It's really nice to see people from all over the world. I would like to salute you, different time zones and different people with different perspectives. I'm really happy to be here, indeed. So I guess I will take from where Alex left. So source to sea approach is where the EEA applied recently to the marine litter problem. But first of all, before presenting you the source to sea assessment of the European marine litter and plastic pollution problem, I would like to also give you some information on the Zero Pollution Action Plan of the European Union and the assessment recently that the EEA has done on the assessment of this monitoring of this action plan, where we are in regards to the zero pollution targets in Europe. So I guess I can share my screen, yeah? Interesting. So I don't know how to use.
Okay, no problem.
It's fine. It's better because I guess. Okay, so maybe first stop sharing. I just deleted some of the slides because I think it was too many. So how to share?
So you can go to share screen and then you can select the application that you want to use. In this case, I imagine PowerPoint. So you can share the PowerPoint itself.
Yeah, I guess I did it. Is it fine? Do you see my
screen?
Yes,
now we see it.
Perfect.
Lovely. Thank you, Mustafa.
Zero Pollution Action Plan is one of the strategies, communications that the European Union published in 2021 in line with the European Green Deal. So we all know that the pollution is a serious source of problems, mental and physical diseases, and premature deaths for human health. And it's also a huge problem for our ecosystems. It is one of the main 6 drivers of biodiversity loss in the world. The action plan aims to reduce the air, water, and soil pollution to the levels that are no longer considered harmful to health and natural ecosystems that respect the boundaries of our planet can cope with. So the action plan aims creating a toxic-free environment in Europe. The action plan has many different aims. However, there are 6 main interim targets. They will be tracked that are important for the action plan. And these are for 2030, reduce some level of pollution. And for the 2050, achieving a toxic-free environment, healthy environment is the aim of the European Union. One of these main targets are very relevant to today's second part of the presentation. The aim of the European Union is to 50% reduce the plastic litter at the sea and 30% reduce the microplastic releases. The EEA, you can download or just click the link to see the short version and the web report, published recently, is responsible from the monitoring of the action plan and published recently an assessment in December 2022 on how the Europe is doing on the pollution subject and the targeted distance assessment of the zero pollution targets. The report is 4 chapters. The first 3 chapters represents the integrated structure of the pollution. Pollution, as Alex also started from a very good perspective, that pollution is not only the pollution in our soil, in our air, or in our water. It comes from a source. There are drivers of the pollution, the production and consumption cycles. If we cannot manage them, if we cannot make them clean and circular, the consumption and production cycles, processes, then we cannot achieve a pollution. then it is a pillar that affects us, this pollution, when it comes to the air, water, or soil. It's a health dimension on human health, the air pollution and its impacts, and the water pollution and its impacts on human health, and the ecosystems impacts, which the pollution affects the ecosystem's health dramatically, very negative. And anyhow, this impact comes us through indirect or direct pathways and affects our health again. An example is the food chain. The chemicals pollute the environment, and then the fish eats the chemicals or the plastics. Then we digest this and impacts our health. The action plan monitoring also has different chapters, as I said, on this, and also has signals, which we have some information on the certain topics as soil pollution, light pollution, but not the full information on some certain chemicals, emerging substances, emerging chemicals as PFAS or persistent chemicals that we are in Europe not able to monitor perfectly. And these also can be read by you. And we have some cross-cutting stories which represents the integrated structure, intermediate structure of the pollution. It starts from the land, it goes to the air and comes back to the earth, to water and land through air depositions, for example, of the nutrients. The sections of the ecosystems part, which I will focus, is the freshwater, marine, air, and soil domains. And for today's sake, to also reduce the time that I will use for the source of solution part, which I think that might be much interesting for you, I will not present the rest of the pollution other than the marine pollution and litter items. But you can always visit these web pages. It's very useful, and we are here to also answer your questions in any topic that you are interested in the pollution. The plastic pollution in European seas has been on a hot spot for the last decade because it's increasing a lot. It's a very uncontrolled area until now, and we can monitor it much better in the last decade. The assessment that has been recently made by the EEA revealed that the 75% of the European marine areas are potential problem areas, or we can call them polluted areas due to marine litter. And this amount varies according to the regional seas. The 43% pollution at the Mediterranean Sea is misleading because the open seas, we cannot assess the full area at the moment because of lack of data. We hope that the second version will be better, shows that the open seas areas shows clean in microplastics, but actually if you look closer to the Mediterranean, the coastal areas are much more polluted than the Northeast Atlantic and the Baltic seas, and similar polluted with the Black Sea. And where we are, according to the plastic litter problem, we can say that according to the European officially reported data, in the last 5 years trend, since 6 years trend, since 2016, the litter might be decreasing. This might be the outcome of the European policies as Marine Strategy Framework Directive or Single-Use Plastics Directive or Circular Economy strategies. However, we will be better telling better story in the next version in 2024. Together with the marine litter, 80% of the ecosystems in Europe are problem areas due to chemical pollution, and still 25% of these areas assessed are like problematic in eutrophication. Did you know that really 99% of the Baltic Sea coasts have eutrophication problems still? In summary of the ecosystems part of the assessment, which I only presented a part of the marine litter and the marine problem side, marine pollution parts, pollution remains in Europe as a problem, serious human health and ecosystems problem, and majority of our ecosystems are contaminated. And there is a slow progress to reduce the impacts of the air pollution, and still 75% of the ecosystems are at risk of eutrophication because of the air depositions. The water pollution slowed down. In Europe, we had wonderful directives and legislation, and this helped us a lot to decrease the number of chemical pollution and eutrophication and other sources of pollution in the European waters, fresh waters. However, after that, after 2010s, we see a slowdown, a kind of like there is no decline in the water statuses anymore. And the agriculture is the main sector that impacts the pollution, that creates the pollution, diffuse pollution, especially in Europe. And the persistent pollutants contaminate our European soils, and we need more information on soils to build better assessment of the pollution problem. Now, in the last part of the presentation, finally, I come to the Source to Sea report of the European Environment Agency. The report is an important contribution, a timely and important contribution to the knowledge base and methodology in Europe and in the world. It's timely because it's at the same time the European legislation is moving towards an integrated structure, and the monitoring also requires an integrated monitoring of everything, not in silos. And also there's an upcoming agreement of the binding international agreement on plastic pollution. And the plastic pollution agreement initially started only with marine litter topic, and now it also covers the entire life cycle of the plastic because of the consciousness of that the topic cannot be solved only solving the marine litter or monitoring the marine litter. So the report provides a very structured, a very robust methodology, a good starting point to help the monitoring of the agreement and also the SDG 14 target that Alex referred in his presentation. And the report's aim is to provide a complete picture to policymakers of the problem and to establish a robust methodology from source to sea. What is the problem? Why plastic pollution is a problem? Today, as you see, wood, metal, paper, wood or cotton, whatever material looks like wood is plastic. So plastic is everywhere and it's increasing. The use is uncontrolled in a way, like legislatively uncontrolled way, increasing. And the mismanaged part, our management capacities are limited. Mismanaged part is leaking to the environment. It's very striking that until 2019, the GDP of Europe, gross domestic product, increases. And of course, the waste generation increases in growing economies, and the plastic packaging waste increases more than them. What is dramatic is even in COVID times, while gross domestic product of Europe decreases, plastic packaging waste still increases. So this waste, this problem of the plastics today creates the marine litter problem. Plastic waste, and 85% of the plastic waste is marine litter is plastic waste. And the drivers of the plastic waste is, as we call, the human needs, the sectors that helps to cover the demand over the human needs. And with almost 40%, packaging is the leading human need and the source of plastic waste problem. And this plastic waste, while cannot be managed, the part of it that cannot be incinerated, recycled, or properly stored, leaks to our environment. And these leakages carried by wind or especially by rivers to our seas. The recent research shows that 626 million items are flowing to European seas via rivers. Plastic items are flowing to the European seas. And as a result, 75% of the European seas are polluted at the moment. As you see in this figure, in this table, that our waste managing capacity increased between 2012 and 18. However, total waste production increased, so the mismanaged waste followed this increase. So there is no decrease in the plastic waste generation. And when we look to these maps in coastal or country level, without a few exceptions, mismanaged PPSI, plastic packaging and small plastic items, considerably high when we compare with 2012. Therefore, waste management also is not a silver bullet. We should prevent the waste at first. And as I showed you, the waste is carried to this mismanaged plastic waste is carried via rivers to the European coasts and to the seas. And 90% of riverine floating litter in Europe flows through the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea. And as a result, our assessment MOLD tool, a multi-metric indicator-based tool overlapping different indicators of the marine litter at the sea, shows that 75% of the assessed seas are polluted. And this graph, this table summarizes us from the source of the plastic problem, from the drivers of the plastic problem, to the sink of the driver, to the sink area where it is seas and the carrying rivers. The situation looks that compared to 2012, we are not doing better, even much worse in many dimensions of the plastic streams to the seas. So the report is concluded by some recommendations on data collection and data assessment, generating of different indicators, especially which can communicate with each other, that we can build better assessments in the future, and improving knowledge on plastic waste leakages, and finally enhancing the riverine litter monitoring and modeling processes for the EEA to help the European Union and the United Nations to better monitor the litter and plastics pollution problem from source to sea. Finally, the dirty secret behind the marine litter is that we cause 100% of it, and all of it is indeed preventable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa, for the very interesting presentation. I think it is striking, really, that the plastic waste kept increasing even in COVID times when GDP was indeed not. And I think it is also striking what you said about packaging being the leading type of plastic pollution. So we really need to take this into account when we think of this, of our patterns of production, consumption also. This is super important. And what you said also about the communication of information, of data collection, and this can only be done when we really have this flow of information between one actor and the other. Thank you so much, Mustafa. I now will introduce our third speaker for the day. Let me share the screen for a second here. So we have now Allard Marx from Ethic. He is the founder and CEO of Ethic. And Allard in particular has a background in pharmaceuticals, foods, and sustainability. Ethic is a skincare company, but the products of Ethic are have very interesting features that Allard will tell us more about, and are certified marine positive. Allard and the Ethic team also built a community, the Tim Coral, to protect reefs and coral-based ecosystem. So I'm looking really forward to hearing from Allard, and the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us today.
Unmute, please.
Allard, you're still on mute. Try to speak now.
I am speaking.
Lovely.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now let me just get that up. And of course, I am not on the right slide because I'm still playing around with it. Just 1 second, just 1 second. I'm sorry about that.
Don't worry, take your time. Lovely.
Okay, here we are. Well, thank you all for inviting me, first of all, and thank you, Alex and Mustafa, for giving me a good starting point about the pollutants that end up in the sea. I think we face two major challenges, and from the sort of private sector perspective, where we can only really affect a small part of all this, there are two big challenges. One is engaging consumers in this process so that we have action that people actually take at the micro level. And the other one is recognizing that filtration and water treatment, and you both alluded to it, is not really the answer. We have to remove the pollutants before they get there, because removing them at the filtration or water treatment level just means that we have to do something with the pollutants and get rid of them elsewhere. So let me just launch into this. Just a couple of stats that bring us into my territory, or ethics territory, which is personal care products. Just some startling things, that there's something like 6 billion people's untreated sewage is still going into the ocean. When it comes to chemicals, I have difficulty finding reliable data on how many chemicals end up in the ocean from wood pulp production, from runoff from roads, from things that people really don't talk about very much yet. From personal care products, we know that something like 82,000 chemicals end up in the ocean. And we already have the tip of the iceberg, which is sunscreens, which A couple of countries have now banned a few ingredients, but there's still no legislation. There are no global international standards to regulate what claims are made in this territory. Recently, Spain banned shampoos from being used on the beaches. Our approach has been relatively scientific because the whole company was started by me reading an article about some Italian scientists called Roberto da Navarro and Cinzia Corinaldesi, who discovered that sunscreens were killing marine life and coral in particular. And what was startling about that is that it only takes one drop to start a viral epidemic in coral. And it is estimated that of all the coral that is killed in 1 year, 10% of it is attributable to sunscreens. Pretty scary stuff. And when we then look at shampoos, nobody really talks about this in any detail yet in the public arena, amongst consumers. But if sunscreens are a problem, then let's just imagine how much more shampoo ends up in the ocean through water treatment that doesn't take out the harmful ingredients. And we know from a number of studies already that shampoos do damage marine life. The approach we're taking, and this has been our vision and what has really sustained and steered our product development over the last 12 years since we started, was that, of course, we want to develop products that are fantastic for the consumer and meets their needs and wants. That's critical, because if they don't do that, they won't sell. Then we want products that are non-damaging for the ocean and a mechanism to help regenerate the ocean, which is basically giving money back to coral nurseries, mangrove forest development, and seagrass plantations, as well as seaweed farming. And underpinning all that, there must be a scientific approach. If there's no legislation, if there is no control, if there is no standard, then it is up to us to take that responsibility on board, and it's up to us to prove that our products really stand up to scrutiny, which recently has happened with the European Patent Office and Beiersdorf, the owner of Nivea, attacking our patent and failing twice to dent it, so it's standing. That's the sort of credibility we seek. And our first product has been a sunscreen, and it's the only patented eco-compatible formula in the world, proven by the self-same scientists that discovered the problem in the first place. And that's why we have that little gold tag on there now, because for us, that proof is fundamental. And this is what we want to lead our industry with, the personal care industry, in determining that without scientific proof, conducted by credible scientists with proven methodologies, there is no point in claiming that your product is reef safe. Prove it, please. All of the manufacturers that have reef safe products, I can't find the proof. And if I can't find it, then consumers probably can't find it either. There is enormous potential in developing new products, and we have one patented ingredient which comes from red seaweed. Who'd have guessed it? Nature protects itself from the sun too. Fish protect themselves from the sun's UV rays. So does seaweed. And in that seaweed, in red seaweed, we found a family of ingredients which protect from the UV rays and are also very powerful antioxidants. And we've used those in a high-end cream initially, because the cost of extraction and purification is still exorbitant. And there's potential in that area. We're now working with a university in Scotland and a biotech company on developing a shampoo which fits exactly into that same philosophy and that way of thinking. So this is a shampoo that will be safe for the ocean. And the most important aspect of that shampoo is, in fact, the surfactant. Surfactants are the ingredients which help oil and water to mix. And we have found a source of biosurfactant, which is actually already from the ocean and is circular, does no damage, and we can develop that through biotechnology. And that's what we're working on at present. I just want to summarize with a couple of actions that we're taken. And I noticed earlier that Tota Russo joined us from a hotel in Rhodes, and I would encourage her to have a look at this website. There are reefs, also coral reefs in the Mediterranean, and we've also tested our products on sea urchins and clams. it's very important that we engage people in this process, and we engage, in this case, hotels in these processes. Many hotels stock what they believe are safe, reef-safe sunscreens, which actually have no proof, sadly. And we don't want to tell them that they're wrong in the selection they've made, but what we want to do is give them a package of help to save the reef and have clear water around their locations. And together with a booking site provider, a white label booking site provider, we've developed the Coral Reef Hotels Association, and subsequently there will be a booking site associated with that. And I invite any other listeners that know hotels that are on or near reefs to take a look at that. The first 10 join for free, so please take advantage of that opportunity. So take a look at coralreefhotels.org to find out more about that. That concludes my presentation, except for a couple of things. There are a number of forthcoming studies coming out that we have, I suppose, encouraged. We're not the ones carrying them out. They're being done by very reputable scientists. One of them is a review of all the data, the effect of surfactants, that's the active ingredients in shampoos, and the effect they have on marine life. And another study is actually testing some of the best-selling shampoos in the world on seagrass, which, as probably all of you already know, is a very crucial carbon sink within the ocean, and that's the green within our blue. So getting these sort of studies out there and getting them published, not just in scientific journals, but getting the media to cover these studies is really a prerequisite for engaging with consumers and getting them to be more aware about these issues and to change their habits. And that concludes my presentation. And if anybody wants to ask questions, there's my email address on the left-hand side. I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allard. I think it was very interesting hearing about how some of the ingredients of products that we use on a daily basis even might not just impact our skin naturally and our health, but we should always take into account our consumption patterns also affect the environment around us, which in the end, I must say, comes back at us because our health depends on the condition of the environment as well. And a series of benefits and ecosystem services coming from the environment also matter to our daily lives. So it's really important that we learn more and more about the things we use and how they affect the surrounding environment and ecosystem. And now I will gladly present the other speaker for today, the fourth speaker. We have Professor Carlos Garcia de Leaniz from Swansea University, representing Blue River Foundation. He works at the Department of Bioscience, and he at the Blue River Foundation seeks to turn innovation into river restoration through advocacy, consultancy, education, and the development of economic incentives, including co-participation mechanisms and crowdfunding. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Professor de Leaniz. And I leave the floor to you, and thank you again very, very much for joining us today.
Okay. Thank you so much, Alessandro. Can you see my slide?
Now, yes, perfect. Thank you, Carlos.
Okay, so thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And what I would like to do is to share with you our vision for better, healthier rivers, not just for nature, but also for people. So let's start with the problem that we are trying to tackle here, which is not a trivial one. Now, the World Economic Forum, every few years, what they do is that they map the so-called global stressors, and they map the most important problems that humanity faces along two axes. On the one hand, they take into account how likely it is that this problem will occur. And on the other hand, they try to estimate what impact will that problem have if the problem were to occur. Now, consistently, they have looked at the same stressors, and they change a little bit from year to year. But you find that some are always in the upper right quadrant. That is, some are stressors which are extremely likely to happen, and those, and when they happen, they are going to have huge impacts. I'll just give you an example. The threat posed by weapons of mass destruction, if it happened, will have a huge impact. But the likelihood that this is going to be a problem that is going to affect the whole of the world is actually very small. Likewise, illicit trade, for example, is something which is happening across the board, but the impact, the bigger scheme of things, compared to other stressors, is not so high. What is unique about the water crisis is that we know that this is one of the most important stressors worldwide. It's highly likely, it's happening very often, and when it is happening, it's having a huge impact. Okay, and what is the problem? Well, the problem very often is that the water that we have is the same, it hasn't changed, but is distributed in different ways. We now find situations where there isn't enough water, and in other cases, there is too much water. And in order to tackle some of these problems, we need to understand what water aquatic ecosystems do, or what is special about them. And this is one of the things that our foundation is trying to do. And let me just take with you what is unique about rivers, because these are the ecosystems that we want to focus on. Well, there are four, perhaps more, but the four most important defining characteristics of rivers. The first one is that they are very rare. We are talking about something that makes up less than 0.8% of the surface of the earth. And if we look at water itself, we find that rivers themselves represent about 0.5% of all the fresh water that we have. So we are talking about something extremely rare. It's almost like an anomaly. And yet, we also find that the second most defining characteristic of these ecosystems is how rich they are, how important. Let me just take you through some data. We don't know for sure, but the best estimates suggest that there may be 34,000 species of that live in freshwater. Many of these only live in rivers. We are talking about 15,000 species of fish and about 19,000 other species. But of course, microorganisms and algae are grossly underestimated. We are talking about insects, we're talking about crustaceans, we're talking about worms, we're talking about mollusks. Now, the richness of this water cannot be overemphasized. It harbors or it accounts for about 40% of all the fish biodiversity and more than 1/3 of all the vertebrate diversity. Of the roughly 31,000 species of fish, about 15,000 are only found in rivers. So that means that very often we are reminded how important coral reefs are, and they are very important, how important seagrass meadows are, and they are very important. But we forget that when we compare like with like, the amount of biodiversity, the sheer biodiversity that we find in rivers or in freshwater in general is almost 100 times higher per unit area than what you find in the sea. And very often we don't take that into account. We just simply ignore that. The third defining characteristic of rivers that I would like to share with you is how relevant they are. We are talking about viruses and bacteria and fungi, which are essential for nutrient recycling. We are talking about algae, which are responsible for primary productivity. Some of these are freshwater species, of course. We are talking about riparian plants, which provide the buffer that we need to mitigate the effects of flooding, provide shade to mitigate climate change, and provide nutrients that are essential for rivers to function properly. We are talking about some invertebrates, aquatic invertebrates, that can act as ecosystem engineers. I think it's no exaggeration to say that rivers are possibly our most valuable natural resource. And just to put this into perspective, about 2 billion people rely on rivers for drinking. They have no other source of water, of fresh water to drinking. About 500 million people live on deltas, which are sustained by rivers, and they depend on these transfer of sediments to maintain these deltas. And it has been estimated that up to 66 million people rely on rivers for fishing, and that freshwater fish may be the main source of animal protein. So we find here what has been termed a conservation paradox. On the one hand, this is one of the most valuable ecosystems we have on Earth. It provides food, it provides drinking, enables us to transport goods, it provides the water that we need to maintain industry, to be able to continue manufacturing processes. It provides opportunities for recreation. They allow us to extract minerals. They provide hydropower, and of course, they maintain biodiversity. And at the same time, this is one of the most threatened ecosystems in the world. Is threatened by pollution, as we have seen in the previous talks. Is threatened by water abstraction, by overexploitation, by fragmentation, by habitat loss, by encroachment, by climate change, and by aquatic invasive species in the industry. So it's not a coincidence, or it's not, it makes some reading to see that the people who have been tracking how biodiversity has been changing over the last 40 years, they have developed this so-called Living Planet Index. And when you look at rivers, you find something remarkable. They found that terrestrial mammals have declined at a rate of 25% over the last 40 years, which is massive. Marine fish, 20%, again, it's massive. Freshwater fish, 65%. And when we look at fish that live only in rivers, we find migratory fish that live in rivers, they find that the decline has been a staggering 76%, which in Europe is more than 90%. So this brings me to the fourth defining characteristic of rivers, which is how grossly undervalued they are. This is not new. Plato said that 2,000 years ago. He pointed out that what is rare is valuable, and water, which is the best of all things, is also the cheapest. And that has been repeated by others ever since. For example, the Global Water Intelligence drew attention to the fact that there is this gap between the price of water and its sheer value. And it's only this week that we have been reminded by the Global Commission on the Economics of Water that by 2030, this is just around the corner, there will be a 40% shortfall between the demand for water and the water that we have. And that the only solution, the only long-term solution, must be to cease underpricing water. So how can we reverse this? Well, we think that it can be reversed by changing our mindset and by changing how we view this problem. And I think it's very important, we think it's very important to have realistic objectives and a realistic vision. We believe that not all rivers can be pristine, that's not possible, but we believe that all rivers can be better. We also think that it is very important that citizens take ownership of their local rivers and that they feel proud about it. And in order to achieve that, we believe it is essential that we start to monetize river quality and that we devise schemes and mechanisms that enable people to reward improvements. And that needs to be done by moving away from the state and embracing the carrot, emphasizing the need, not the demand. And in practical terms, we think that that needs to be done by focusing on three criteria, which are the ones that matter the most in river restoration: water quality, flow, and naturalness. And I'm going to show you, just to share with you how this is possible, how this is being done all over the world. This is an example, a case scenario, the city where I was born, Madrid, the river Manzanares, and that's how it looked like at the beginning of the century. It was still in relatively good ecological condition. But during the 1950s, only in the 2000s, there was this massive widespread encroachment where basically highways and motorways, they were just gaining space in the river. A very ambitious project started in 2004. The river is not perfect, but now there is a river which is benefiting of about 700,000 people. So we have gone from neglect to restoration to being valued. Another iconic example is the river that runs through downtown Senua. Again, in the 1970s, it was covered, it was buried by a motorway, by a flyover. And in the year 2000, they started this ambitious restoration program. Again, it's not a natural river, but it is a river. And it is now being used and enjoyed by 60,000 users every day. And this is happening all over the world. There are very ambitious plans in China, there are very ambitious plans in America, and there are also very ambitious plans.
Thank you, Professor, for the incredible contribution. I think it is so fundamental that you brought rivers into the equation, because really what many of the other speakers also told about was this source to sea approach, right? And rivers are a fundamental channel also, in addition to all the things that you said, that are an incredible metaphor, I think, of the complexity of governance for water management, because what happens along the stream has to be the contribution, cumulative contribution of all the stakeholders that are along it. So it is so important to consider them in this equation for really integrated water management, I think. And now I think I will share some information about the last speaker for today. Ido Sella from eConcrete. He's co-founder and CEO. eConcrete is an interdisciplinary science-based company with a mix of professionals, including biologists, ecologists, environmental engineers, designers, and concrete technology specialists. It patented a solution and implements solutions for waterfronts, but not only, that are a combination of bioenhancement, texture, and science-based innovation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about eConcrete's experience with waterfronts and with the complexity of implementing these solutions from the construction also perspective. So for the physical environment, and how this also has to have to do with the complexity of stakeholders also on the waterfront. So the floor is yours, Ido, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. I'm happy to join. I'll share my screen, just a minute. So a little bit on I think we're getting to the point on that there was discussion on water on land, there was discussion on freshwater, on runoff, and now focusing on the edges of where we actually meet and where the land meets the sea. And this is our main focus in eConcrete the last 10 years, and my personal focus as a marine biologist in the last 20 years. And I think maybe starting with this staggering look on where most of us live. And 50% of the world population resides along our coastline, which means the entire infrastructure and the support that this huge mass of people need is actually stated on the water edge. So if we look at our coastline, they're actually completely, and large portion of them is completely affected by urbanized and working waterfronts. In all of them, we see a process that is called a coastal squeeze. Coastal squeeze is when there is a topogenic effect on the area where we meet the water. And instead of getting an area which is sloping and providing a lot of surface area that can support ecosystem services and can support the ecological niches, because of the need of the use of the land, we're squeezing the edge and getting it into a vertical surface. At the same time, we see this actually increasing dramatically in the last 20 years because of increased stormness, because of prediction of sea level rise. We need to build bigger, more massive barriers. And this is true for the entire world. We see a process which is called coastal hardening. We build and we reinforce our edges in order to cope with the changing environment. It's happening around the world, and if you can see, this is an image coming from the UN database, and you can see that in red, area and coastlines that are considered altered, severely altered because of human population and human needs. And it's amazing to see, but it's really a massive portion of where we see the population and where we see and most of our spending our life. And what we're doing in those areas, we actually, we're squeezing out natural habitats that are providing us ecosystem services. If it's in tropical environment, it will be coral reef, and in temperate environment, it might be oyster bed or oyster reef, or in other area mangroves, or just rocky shorelines. But in all of them, we're losing the sloping area, the surface area, which is super important where the land meets the sea. This is the area where it's the most productive habitat in the marine environment in terms of production. And it's also an area which is highly supportive of nursery for juvenile fish and other organisms. And it's a source and basically supporting the deep water in so many levels. So if we take this and we step back and we say, okay, the entire discussion that I was just mentioning is about how we address human effect on the natural environment. Well, we have a database. We have also knowledge on it. So if we look at terrestrial environment, we have the rural preserve environments. But at the same time, we know what is urban nature, and all of us are educated in urban nature. All of us are educated. What is the value of having parks? What is the value of having green roofs? Well, there is a gap because the city doesn't, and the urbanized area doesn't end at the water edge. They go deep into the water, and this area were neglected for a very long time. So can we address those surfaces in the same methodology that we address urban nature? And this is where reconciliation ecology is stepping. Can we harness urban industrial settings for providing us ecosystem services in the area where we live in the most? And before that, maybe looking and analyzing what our coastline are made of. And this is the main reason that I and marine biologists found us of dealing with concrete. 70% of coastal and marine infrastructure worldwide are concrete-based. This is an available material worldwide. It's one of the most suitable for marine construction in terms of structural performance. But again, at the same time, it's not a very supportive substrate for colonization, specifically for sessile organisms. It's usually associated with low biodiversity, dominance of invasive species, and poor water quality around it. And when we started to study it, and it's actually, we utilized the same methodologies that was initially used for assessing reconciliation ecology in terrestrial environment into the marine environment. And it's starting from the beginning. Same way that you want to create a site for pollination on urban environment, you need to look, when we look in the marine environment, it's all about larvae. So all about those organisms that have releasing their production units into the water column that are drifting into the plankton. And at a certain point, those organisms are meeting the substrate. They're meeting the reef, they're meeting the rock, they're meeting the sand. They need to take a decision if they're going to connect themselves into the substrate. I'm talking about the barnacles and the oysters and the corals and the bryozoans. And all those organisms need to take those larvae. Basically, are taking the kind of a decision that is influenced by different types of factors, if they can connect themselves to the substrate or not. And if they will do it, that's it. That's a one time. They're going to stay there for life. And if the environmental conditions are not suitable for them to grow and survive, they will die. And because of that, that's the reason that that is a critical point in starting and looking at reconciliation ecology on waterfront. So we started to study how the substrates are interacting with the larvae. And one of the main problems with concrete is that it doesn't provide the good cues for settlement. And a lot of organisms cannot settle on concrete, specifically concrete for marine environment, because it's a very, in terms of the performance requirement, it's a very high-end mixed design. It's a very high-end concrete. There's a lot of chemicals that are involved in the concrete, within the concrete batching and within the mix, that are negatively affecting its ability to support the settlement of the larvae. So the first thing was, how can we deal with that? And we developed a technology that can be integrated into the casting of any concrete, but actually limiting the leaching out of those components and blocking their leaching out to the surface. And by doing this, we actually neutralize on the surface, allowing more larvae to settle. The second thing was create a surface complexity, creating the microhabitat on the surface in order to make them survive and grow and make sure that they're positioned in the right area where they can forage or they can filter from the water. And because of that, we're adding the level of complexity. And the main idea was, how can we do that as biology? Integrate all of those while we're in full compliance with the industry standard and allowing the contractors, the engineers, the asset owner to take those tools, toolbox, and implement them on coastal construction. And we do it in the proper way, this is what you'll see. You can actually increase biodiversity and you can increase biomass on concrete structure in a tremendous way. In more than 40 projects worldwide, ranging from temperate environment to tropical environment, we more than double biodiversity. Significantly increase the water quality because you introduce more filter feeders and local species. Tilting the ratio between native and invasive species. This is super important. This is invasive species are the ones that are growing and are more robust and can move from one area to the other. And because of that, usually when they are more tolerant to substrate that are not good to other. And because of that, they flourish on them. And that's the reason coastal construction is a hotspot for invasive species. By opening the substrate for competition, we allow more local species to settle on them and grow and reduce the dominance of those invasive species. And one of the main benefits is actually creating a carbon sink. Why there is a carbon sink? Because the shells of the oysters, the skeleton of the corals, is calcium carbonate, is one of the most efficient processes in carbon sequestration. Just to give a sense, 1 kilometer of a seawall in a port, which is the standard key wall, will have can get the same carbon sequestration capacity as 100 adult trees every year. Now, how do you take all of this and put it into practice? So here is an example. What you see on the right side and on the left side is exactly the same product. One is modified and the other is not. This is after a year in the water. Both of them. This is New Jersey. After a year in the water, both of them are placed touching each other, and you can actually see the difference. We have more than 10 scientific publications of monitoring of 2 years and up to 8 years of monitoring, showing how you can actually increase the capacity of infrastructure to support ecosystem services. Just an example of how this is looking in practice when you utilize it, you can actually allow and support the ability of organisms to grow and flourish on the surface, on the hard substrate. And now it just to see the scale of implementation. So this is the port of Cala Rajada in Mallorca. The technology was integrated into the construction of the breakwater, into the different units that are used to build the breakwater. And by doing this, you put in the water a substrate that usually is supposed to be there for a 60 to 100 years design life, and giving it a better starting point because he can support the growth of life. Other factors that are used, and I just pull things that are more related to marinas, are key walls that are used for construction of new vessels that can be built in a better way. This is from an ROV that was sent there like 2 weeks ago. And you can see the bottom is the standard concrete, and you can see that the upper part is the modified concrete, and you can see the difference. This is the next step. And the next step, and I'm not sure what is jumping, but I apologize for that. The next step is, we're talking as biologists, we know the difference, but how can we educate the public? How can we take this into the next phase? How can we increase the interaction of the public with the underwater environment and understanding the value of those habitats which are mostly not exposed? And in this project called the Living Port project that we funded, got generous fund by the European Union, we coupled with universities, with the Port of Vigo, of modifying the port infrastructure in a way that it can be support, controlled, monitored, and tested for a long time monitoring period, and also create a platform for outreach. And the design, this what you see here is the rendering that was done 4 years ago. Then when we started, it was 2.5 years ago. Sorry, in this phase when we started, of how do we envision this to happen? So modifying seawalls and supporting life, creating a platform which allowed the public to look at this. And this is from a month ago. And I'm actually now joining you from cloudy Vigo, because tomorrow we're actually opening the project where we integrated seawalls and revetments that are ecologically supportive, created a platform that can be used for outreach and education for the public to reach out and see the underwater life and assess it with time, including a monitoring program of ecological impacts, biodiversity, also the effect on the quality of the water in the port, and many more. And I think there is a point when now the paradigms are changing. It's not about mitigating our impact. It's how we build better in a more responsible way. And new norms are needed. And there's more and more white paper coming from the US, coming from Europe, coming from other regions that are focusing on how can we build better and how can we provide ecosystem services on the actual construction that we're doing. And one of the big, I think, leap forward was the waterfront edge design guideline that started in New York as a part of the Waterfront Alliance work that gathered scientists and other decision makers and also other factors within the industry of waterfront, and building a system which is more or less equivalent to the lead in terrestrial construction of how can we build in a better and more responsible way, and those are the steps that are going forward in a more thoughtful way of designing and changing the way our future waterfronts will look and function. And I'd like to thank you all.
Thank you, Ido, for the very, very interesting presentation. I think it was fascinating for me to see how normally we are used to thinking of environmental problems as connected in a negative way, one to the other. And in this presentation that you gave, actually, we saw how one solution can positively impact multiple issues, right, that we are facing, how increasing biodiversity, how favoring biodiversity in the waterfront can also affect water quality, so pollution, and how these solutions also tackle coastal erosion and other climate change related issues of the environment. So I think it was really fascinating to hear about eConcrete's experience. And I think, well, I also would like to thank the speakers for being on point and on time, all of them. I think we have some room for questions. If anyone from the audience wants to ask something of the speakers, you can write it in the chat and I would be happy to read it. In the meantime, while the audience thinks of questions that they might want to ask, I would like to try and do some recap of today's session because we heard so many things from the speakers. So we started with UNEP, and Alex told us, gave us an overview of what governance for water management looks like and how different sectors of policy really are involved and how they should be interconnected in ways that can really make this integrated water management effective to tackle problems like pollution. With Mustafa, we also saw the importance of imagining this as a source to see problems. So really every step of the way and how these steps affect the final result, and how microplastic is an increasing problem and how we really should think of our production and consumption patterns. We heard the experience of the private sector in two dimensions. So the construction on one side and the cosmetic industry on the other, and how these can affect series of problems. So pollution, biodiversity, surely, and climate change in this last case of eConcrete, naturally. And from Professor Carlos, we also heard about how rivers have a role to play in this equation and how they act both as important ecosystem service providers on one hand, but also channels of pollution streams, but also of benefits if managed correctly, that lastly affects the sea and coastal environment. So this was really so full of interesting, inspirational aspects, and I would really like to thank again the speakers for tackling them all. I don't see any contribution in the chat. Sanskriti, do you want to? We're approaching the end of the session. Do you want to maybe give a few closing words?
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. And there's been a number of, I think, interesting chats, but I think not really questions. And there was one from Francis, but I think it was already answered. The link is given to the Malaysia example. So I just wanted to thank you very much, Alex and Mustafa, Ahmed, Carlos, and Ido. You've shared today really very useful dimensions of knowledge, including on the crucial nature of water resources and also the biodiversity of freshwater ecosystems, and especially around the significant challenges for different regions of the world, from microplastics and invisible pollutants, chemicals, nutrient enrichment, and untreated sewage, as well as the necessity of integrated and collaborative governance around addressing of pollution, and no less than to shift to eco-compatible products, technologies, designs, building better, and especially with better guidelines, and the importance as well of this term that you brought to us, Ido, of reconciliation, ecology. And it is, after all, the decade of ecosystems restoration to which FEE hopes to contribute in a meaningful way. Thank you for sharing some really great examples, and congratulations, Ido, on your opening tomorrow. In the coming weeks, the Blue Flag program is initiating a process of reflection and review of criteria, and we will be sure to draw upon these areas of knowledge, and we will keep in mind the importance of site-based actions as well as integrated policy actions at the local and regional levels and the country level. And no less that awareness, commitment, and consumer choice is a powerful driver of change, and organizations like FEE and our sustainable tourism programs like Blue Flag and Green Key have a crucial role. So thanks to our eminent speakers and colleagues from everywhere for joining. And as I mentioned earlier, FEE's global strategic focus in this year, 2023, is reducing environmental pollution. And today's event was part of the webinar series, Acting Against Pollution and the Little S Plus campaign. Alex, we would like to give a heads up on our next event too.
Absolutely.
So yes, this is it. Alex, yeah, maybe you just give the details. We have the QR code too.
Thank you, Sanskriti. Yes, Sanskriti was mentioning this is part of a series of webinars that explore the connection between pollution and the tourist sector, and explore also solutions to tackle this environmental problem. This was the second episode of our series, and we're going to have the third episode on circular economy in tourism on the 2nd of May, 2023. It's organized by our sister program, Green Key. And here you have a QR code that brings you to the registration link. If you liked the session from today, we would highly, highly, highly and warmly recommend you to sign up for the next episode where we will also have very prominent speakers talk about the circular economy in this case, and potential solutions to close these loops in the tourism sector. So we really hope to see you there at the next webinar. And I would like to thank the speakers again, Sanskriti for the very inspiring words, and you all for joining us today. It was really exciting for me having this webinar together, and I hope to see you soon in the next appointments of the Acting Against Pollution series. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice evening or day or wherever you are in the world.
Thank you, Alexander.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.